The air in the glass hive, as we call the third floor annex of Aerodynamics and Structural Solutions, or ADSS, always smelled like a specific cocktail of burnt coffee, ozone from the high end plotters, and the faint dusty scent of old blueprints. We weren't just engineers, we were the correction crew. When a skyscraper in Dubai had a wind oscillation issue that baffled the original architects, or when a suspension bridge in Norway developed a harmonic resonance that threatened to tear it apart, they called us. My name is Caleb. I'm 42 and I've spent 15 years at ADSS. I didn't start at the top. I started in the trenches, calculating bolt shearing tolerances for offshore oil rigs. My team was a tight-knit unit of 6, a group of people I trusted more than my own shadow. We had Marcus, a structural wizard who could calculate load-bearing variances in his head while eating a sandwich, Jax, our CAD specialist, who worked with the speed of a hummingbird on meth, and 3 junior engineers, Leo, Sarah, and Toby, who were the brightest minds I'd ever mentored. Our world was governed by the Midnight Protocol. It wasn't a real company policy, it was the informal, messy, and incredibly efficient way we got things done. It was a culture of high trust and low friction. If Jax noticed a flaw in a schematic at 2 a.m., he didn't file a report or wait for a scheduled sprint meeting. He'd walk over to Marcus's desk, point at the screen, and they'd fix it over a shared pizza. We spoke in a shorthand that sounded like gibberish to outsiders, a mix of high-level physics, inside jokes from past failures, and a mutual respect that didn't need to be stated. We worked in a state of flow that made the company millions and kept the world's infrastructure from collapsing. Our CEO, Arthur, was a man of the old school. He'd been an iron worker in his youth before putting himself through engineering school. He had scars on his knuckles and a deep-seated understanding that high-stakes problem-solving required a certain level of grit and informal camaraderie. He stayed out of our hair, and in return, we made him look like a genius to the board of directors. He knew that the glass hive was the heart of the company, and as long as the math was right and the projects were safe, he didn't care if we wore t-shirts or if our desks were covered in half-disassembled drone prototypes. But Arthur was nearing 70, and the board was getting restless. They didn't see the safety we provided, they saw the lack of process. They wanted modernization, they wanted streamlined operational transparency. What they really wanted was someone to turn our productive, slightly chaotic haven into a predictable corporate machine where every thought could be tracked on a Gantt chart. Enter Julianna. Juliana didn't arrive with a hard hat or a calculator. She arrived with a tablet, a wardrobe of sharp charcoal gray suits, and a title that made my skin crawl: Director of Strategic Culture and Operational Synergy. I remember the first morning she walked into the glass hive. We were in the middle of a war room session. The walls were covered in dry erase ink, intricate diagrams of a suspension cable system for a project in the Andes. Half-eaten donuts were scattered across the drafting tables, and Marcus was currently standing on a chair using a laser pointer to illustrate a stress fracture in a virtual model while calling Jax a syntax error-loving baboon because of a minor glitch in the rendering. We were laughing, shouting ideas, and moving at the speed of thought. Juliana stood in the doorway for a full minute before anyone noticed her. When I finally saw her, the first thing I noted was her expression. It wasn't curiosity or professional interest, it was a profound clinical distaste. It was the look a surgeon gives a particularly messy infection. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was like a scalpel, cold, precise, and designed to cut through noise. The room went quiet. The energy didn't just dissipate, it evaporated. Marcus stepped down from the chair, looking sheepish and tucking his shirt in. "I am Juliana," she continued, not waiting for an invitation to enter our sanctum. "I have been hired to audit the workflows of this department and implement a more robust framework for professional conduct and project management. This," she paused, gesturing to the ink-stained walls and the donut boxes with a slow, sweeping hand, "is an environment of systemic inefficiency and casual unprofessionalism." I stepped forward, extending a hand, trying to bridge the immediate gap. "Caleb, project lead, or actually 3 days ahead of schedule, so the inefficiency might just be the mess of the creative process. She looked at my hand as if it were a biohazard, then slowly shook it with a grip that felt like a robotic clamp. Being ahead of schedule is often a sign of bypassed protocols, Caleb. Speed is not a substitute for structure. In my experience, creative process is usually a euphemism for lack of accountability. That was the first red flag. For 15 years, speed and accuracy had been our dual gods. To Julianna, they were suspicious. Over the next 2 weeks, the glass hive was methodically dismantled. Julianna didn't sit in the executive wing where the air was thin and the carpets were plush. She demanded an office right in the middle of our floor, a glass box within the hive. She had the dry erase walls painted over with magnetic professional surfaces that required special, expensive markers that no one could ever find. She banned food at the desks, claiming it was a sensory distraction to colleagues. But the worst part was the communication reset. She insisted that all internal team interactions be logged. No more walking over to a desk to solve a problem. No more shouting across the room about a torque variance. If it isn't documented in the project management software, PMS, it didn't happen, she told us during our first mandatory Monday morning alignment circle. Julianna, I argued, trying to remain civil while my team watched me with wide, anxious eyes. Sometimes Marcus and Jax need to iterate 20 times in an hour. If they have to file a ticket, categorize it, assign a priority level, and wait for a digital response for every iteration, a task that takes 10 minutes will take 2 days. She smiled then. It was a terrifying movement of the lips, a practiced corporate gesture that didn't reach her eyes, which remained as cold as liquid nitrogen. Then it will be a documented 2 days, Caleb. We are building a scalable culture, not a clubhouse. Furthermore, some of the language I've overheard in this room, references to baboons and syntax gore, is exclusionary and creates an environment that is not psychologically safe. Jax, who was usually the most easygoing guy in the world, looked like he wanted to crawl into his monitor. He had a specialized way of coding our simulations that was incredibly effective but looked messy to an outsider. He called his own work gore as a self-deprecating joke. Julianna interpreted it as a violation of corporate harmony. The tension began to simmer. We were no longer the correction crew. We were the audited assets. Every time we spoke, we felt her eyes on us from her glass box. Every time we laughed, she would look up and make a note on her tablet. The flow was gone. The midnight protocol was being strangled by red tape. The incident that finally broke the peace happened a month into her tenure. We were preparing a massive presentation for a high-profile client, a multi-billion-dollar tech campus in California. It was a prestige project that would define ADSS for the next decade. Julianna had taken over the visual narrative of the presentation, insisting that our technical data was too dense and needed to be curated for executive digestibility. Late on a Thursday evening, the office was quiet except for the hum of the servers. I saw Julianna working on the final deck in her office. I happened to glance at her screen as I was heading to the break room for my 10th coffee of the day, my brain fried from checking the real math behind her narrative. I stopped dead. My heart nearly skipped a beat. She was curating a slide on structural wind load requirements for the main atrium's glass canopy. She had changed a decimal point in the safety margin calculation to make the graph look more symmetrical and visually appealing. She had turned a 0.50 coefficient into a 0.05. In our world, a shifted decimal point isn't an aesthetic choice. It's a building falling down. It's a tragedy that ends in a courtroom. It's the difference between a glass roof that holds and one that shatters under a standard gale. I stopped. My instinct, the one honed over a decade of being the go-to guy, the protector of the math, kicked in. I didn't think about the PMS. I didn't think about alignment circles or siloed communication. I thought about the people who would be standing under that glass. I knocked on her glass door and stepped in. Juliana, hey, sorry to interrupt, but I just noticed something on slide 42. It looks like the wind load coefficient got rounded down to 0.05. It needs to stay at 0.50. It's a small typo, probably just a fat finger error while you were formatting, but it changes the entire structural requirement for the glass facade. We'd need triple the steel if that 0.05 was real, or the roof would fail. She didn't look up at first. She kept typing, her fingers clicking rhythmically against the keyboard. I adjusted that for the visual flow, Caleb. The 0.50 created a spike in the chart that looked aggressive and cluttered. It distracted from the sustainability narrative we're trying to sell to the VPs. I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my back. I felt like I was explaining fire to someone who thought it was just a pretty orange light. It's not an aesthetic spike, Juliana. It's a physical requirement. If we present that to the client and they sign off on it, our engineering stamp is on a lie. If the builders follow that chart, the building wouldn't be safe. It's not about the narrative, it's about gravity. She finally stopped typing. She turned her chair slowly, her movements deliberate and robotic. Her face was a mask of absolute frozen calm. Are you questioning my ability to manage a presentation, Caleb? No, I said, my hands up in a placating, non-threatening gesture. I'm questioning the math. The math is objective. I'm just trying to help you avoid a massive error before the VPs and the clients see it tomorrow morning. It's a quick fix. Help me? She repeated. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming a low, dangerous hiss. You are standing over my shoulder, uninvited, at 7 p.m., telling me that my aesthetic adjustment is a massive error. You are using your seniority and your technical expertise to intimidate me and undermine my execution in a way that feels incredibly gendered. I was genuinely stunned. The word hit me like a physical blow. Gendered? Juliana, the wind doesn't care about gender. The physics of a glass pane under 100-mile-per-hour gusts is the same whether a man or a woman draws the chart. I'm not attacking you. I'm protecting the project. I'm looking at the numbers. You are mansplaining basic aerodynamics to a director, she said, her voice rising just enough to ensure the two junior engineers, Leo and Sarah, who were still at their desks, could hear every word. I have a master's in organizational management from an Ivy League school. I understand how to present data. Your correction is unsolicited, condescending, and frankly, it makes me feel unsafe and belittled in this workspace. Please leave my office. I I'm going to my desk, I said, the blood rushing to my face. I knew the moment the word unsafe was uttered, the conversation was no longer about engineering. It was about HR. I knew when a trap had snapped shut, and I had walked right into it. The next morning, I didn't go to the big presentation. I wasn't allowed. I was met at the front door of the building by Arthur and a representative from HR named Blenda. Brenda was a woman who spoke in compliance speak and never seemed to blink. Arthur wouldn't look me in the eye. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the entire building was finally pressing down on him. We went into a small, windowless conference room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner. Brenda began, her voice a monotone drone. Caleb, a formal complaint has been filed against you by Director Julianna. It cites a pattern of hostile gatekeeping, unsolicited technical interference, and an incident last night described as aggressive workplace intimidation and gender-based belittlement. I looked at Arthur, pleading with my eyes. Arthur, she changed the safety coefficients on the California project for a visual narrative. I was trying to stop the company from committing fraud or causing a structural collapse. Check the deck she presented this morning. Look at slide 42. Arthur sighed, rubbing his temples with trembling fingers. I saw the deck, Caleb. Julianna explained the discrepancy. She said she consulted with a third-party visual data expert and that the slide was clearly labeled as conceptual, not technical. She claims you used a technicality as a weapon to make her feel incompetent in front of her subordinates. It's not a weapon, it's engineering. There is no such thing as a conceptual safety coefficient in a final client deck, I shouted, finally losing my cool. Lower your voice, Caleb, Brenda said sharply, her eyes snapping to mine. This is exactly what the complaint is talking about, your inability to communicate without resorting to technical dominance and aggressive volume. Julianna is here to help us evolve into a modern, inclusive firm. You are making that evolution impossible with your old guard attitude. What's the verdict? I asked, my voice trembling with fear and suppressed rage. A formal verbal warning, Brenda said, sliding a paper toward me. It will be placed in your permanent employee file. Furthermore, we are implementing a communication buffer. You are to have 0 unscheduled or informal interactions with Julianna. All communication must be via the PMS or witnessed by a third party. You are to stay at least 10 feet away from her desk at all times. You are to stick strictly to your assigned tasks. No more helping other departments or correcting work that has not been assigned to you through the proper channels. I looked at Arthur one last time, hoping for a spark of the man who used to weld I-beams. You're letting this happen? You know I'm right about the math. Arthur finally looked up. There was a flicker of the old ironworker in his eyes, but it was buried under layers of corporate exhaustion and boardroom pressure. She's the board's choice, Caleb. They think the glass hive is a liability because we don't have process and transparency. They see our success as luck, not skill. Just follow the rules for a while. Let things settle. I walked out of that room feeling like I'd been stripped naked in front of my team. Marcus, Jax, and the juniors were waiting near the elevators. They didn't need to ask. In an office like ours, the walls have ears, and HR meetings have a specific, heavy silence that follows them like a shroud. We didn't talk in the office. We didn't even look at each other. We waited until 5:01 p.m. We met at the Anchor, a dive bar 3 blocks away where the beer was served in heavy glass mugs and the lighting was too dim for any strategic culture to survive. It was our neutral ground. We sat in a large circular booth in the back. For 20 minutes, no one spoke. We just drank, the only sound the clinking of ice and the muffled roar of the city outside. She's going to kill the company, Jox finally said, slamming his mug down so hard the beer sloshed over the rim. I tried to tell her today that the server load for the new rendering engine was peaking, that we were going to lose the overnight simulations if we didn't throttle the marketing department's cloud usage. She told me to optimize my headspace and that she didn't want to hear negative technical noise until the quarterly review. She literally shushed me. Marcus nodded, his jaw set. She asked me to reimagine the support pillars for the downtown mall project. She said they looked clunky and uninclusive to the open concept design. I told her they were clunky because they were holding up 6,000 tons of concrete and glass. She told me I was being resistant to change and mathematically aggressive. What does that even mean? I looked at my team. I saw the anger, the frustration, but most of all, I saw the fear. They were world-class engineers, people who built the bones of the world, but they were being told that their expertise was a microaggression and their dedication to truth was a barrier to synergy. She wants a professional environment, I said. My voice was calm now. It was the Caleb calm, the voice I used when a structural failure was imminent and panic was the enemy. She wants boundaries. She wants protocols. She wants everything documented, witnessed, and filed in quadruplicate. Marcus looked at me, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. Caleb, you have that look, the one where you start looking for the weak point in the load-bearing wall. What look? Asked Jax. The look he gets right before he proves a contractor used substandard steel and gets them banned from the state, Marcus said. I leaned into the center of the table, my voice dropping to a whisper. Julianna told HR that my unsolicited help was a form of harassment. She told the board that our informal midnight protocol is a legal liability. Arthur told me to just follow the rules. I took a long, slow pull of my beer, letting the coldness settle my nerves. So, that's what we're going to do.
We are going to follow the rules. Every single one. We are going to be the most professional, most documented, most psychologically safe team in the history of ADSS. We are going to give Julianna exactly the world she asked for. You mean, Jack started, a slow, wicked grin spreading across his face.
I mean, I said, the professionalism protocol. From this moment on, we do nothing, absolutely nothing that isn't requested in writing through the PMS. We don't catch mistakes in other departments. We don't heads up anyone about server crashes. We don't point out typos in presentation decks. If a colleague, especially a director, submits a plan that is physically impossible, we don't mansplain gravity to them. We simply execute the request as written, provided it falls within our documented job description. If they ask for a bridge made of balsa wood and hope, we calculate the balsa wood requirements and hit submit. But the projects will fail, Sarah, the junior engineer, whispered, her eyes wide. No, I corrected her, looking her straight in the eye. The processes will succeed perfectly. The projects will merely be the casualties of the strategic culture Julianna wanted. She said speed is no substitute for structure. We're going to give her so much structure she'll be buried in it. We are protecting ourselves. If we help her, we get a warning. If we stay in our silos, we are compliant. We spent the next 3 hours planning. We went through the ADSS employee handbook like it was a holy text, searching for every obscure rule about interdepartmental boundaries, documentation requirements, and work hour limitations. We realized that our informal culture had been a giant invisible safety net for the entire company. We were the ones who caught the accounting errors when the numbers didn't match the materials. We fixed the botched sales pitches that promised things physics couldn't deliver. We kept the servers running when the two-man IT department went home at 5 p.m. We were going to pull the net away. The next Monday, the glass hive was transformed into a corporate cathedral. When Julianna walked in, she didn't see Marcus standing on a chair or hear the exclusionary banter of the correction crew. She saw 6 engineers sitting perfectly upright at their desks, wearing noise-canceling headphones. The air didn't smell like coffee and donuts, it smelled like nothing. The walls were stark, white, and empty. She walked past my desk. Usually, I'd give her a, "Morning, Julianna, heads up, the plotter in 3B is leaking ink." Today, I didn't look up. I didn't acknowledge her existence. I was focused on a spreadsheet. I was exactly 10 feet and 1 inch away from her path, a distance I had measured with a laser rangefinder that morning. She stopped, looking around, sensing the heavy, artificial silence. It was exactly what she demanded in her culture memo, but the reality of it clearly unnerved her. "Caleb," she said. I didn't move. I continued typing. "Caleb," she said louder, her voice echoing in the quiet room. I slowly, deliberately took off my headphones. I turned my head just far enough to see her, maintaining a neutral, pleasant, but utterly blank expression. "Good morning, Director Julianna. I noticed you are addressing me verbally in an open workspace. According to the new operational framework, Section 4.2, all non-emergency directives and inquiries must be initiated via the PMS to ensure a searchable audit trail and to prevent unstructured work interruptions. Would you like me to generate a ticket for this conversation, or will you be sending an electronic request?" She blinked, her mouth slightly open. "I was just going to ask about the status of the Munich project update." "I would be happy to provide a comprehensive update," I said, my voice as flat and emotionless as a dial tone. "Please submit a status request ticket through the portal. I will respond within the mandated 4-hour window for non-critical inquiries. Is there anything else? I have a deep work focus block scheduled for the next 90 minutes, and I must adhere to my documented productivity schedule to ensure compliance." She stared at me, her jaw tightening. I could see the gears turning. She wanted to yell, but there was nothing to yell at. I was being perfectly, agonizingly professional. "Fine, Caleb, I'll send a ticket." "Thank you, Director. I look forward to the documentation. It's essential for our synergy." I put my headphones back on before she even turned away.
The first crack in her new world appeared by Wednesday. The marketing department sent over a request for a structural aesthetic analysis for a new global brochure. Usually, Jacques would open the file, see they'd used an old rendering of a building we'd redesigned because the original balcony design was a death trap, and he'd call them immediately. Hey, don't use that one. It's the version where the roof falls off if it snows. Today, Jacques didn't call. He didn't even send an informal email. He opened the ticket, he saw the specific request. Please provide aesthetic feedback on the attached image for color grading and professional alignment. He wrote back, the image is centered, the color balance is professional, and it aligns with the brand's blue-toned palette. Ticket closed. He knew they were using the wrong building. He knew it would make the company look like amateurs to the high-end clients receiving the brochure, but correcting the image choice was a technical structural concern, and they had only asked for aesthetic feedback. To offer more would be unsolicited technical interference. By Friday, the professionalism protocol was starting to draw blood. Julianna had scheduled a synergy brainstorming session for Friday afternoon. In the old days, these were informal, high-energy meetings where we'd solve a week's worth of problems in an hour by throwing ideas at the wall. When she walked into the conference room, we were all sitting there with our laptops open, hands folded, waiting for the clock on the wall to hit exactly 2 p.m. Okay, team, she said, trying to project a forced energy that felt like a battery-operated toy. We have a challenge. The load-bearing requirements for the California campus are coming back 20% higher than anticipated in the initial conceptual narrative. We need to find a way to reduce the steel cost without losing the light and airy vision I promised the board. In the old days, Marcus would have jumped up and said, we can't. Physics doesn't work that way. Gravity is heavy. But if we switch to a cantilevered support on the north wing, we can save 10% on the concrete and hide the steel in the rafters. Today, Marcus said nothing. He stared at his screen. Jack said nothing. I said nothing. Caleb? Julianna prompted, her voice gaining a sharp edge of desperation. You're the project lead. You've built 20 of these things. Ideas? I'm sorry, Director. My job description, as updated in the PMS last month, defines my role as execution of approved designs. Providing design alternatives during a synergy session is categorized as strategic engineering consulting, which is a function that requires a separate budgetary allocation and a formal project initiation document from your office. I wouldn't want to overstep my silo and engage in unsolicited interference with your vision for the project. I'm sure you have a plan.
I am asking for your expertise, Caleb. This is a meeting, she snapped. I understand, and I value the structure of this meeting. Please submit a formal request for alternative analysis to the team via the PMS. We will need to conduct a documented, peer-reviewed study, which usually takes 5 to 7 business days, according to the Quality Control Protocol. We cannot provide off-the-cuff remarks as they lack the robust framework required by the new culture you've implemented. We want to ensure everything is documented for the board. She looked at the rest of the team. Marcus, Jax, Sarah, they all nodded in unison. Polite, professional, and utterly, devastatingly useless. This meeting is over, she hissed, her face turning a blotchy red. As we walked out, I checked my watch. The meeting had lasted precisely 6 minutes and 14 seconds. We went back to our desks and continued to do exactly what was in our contracts. No more, no less. The real disaster, however, was building in the basement servers. Our main structural analysis server, the one that ran the complex simulations for every project ADSS owned, was a temperamental beast we called the Kraken. It was powerful, but it had a known memory leak in its legacy OS that required a manual reset of the cache every 48 hours. We'd always done it informally. Whoever was staying late on a Tuesday or Thursday would just hit the reset script while they waited for their files to save. It took 30 seconds. On Saturday morning, I was at home, working in my garden. I knew the Kraken was due for a reset. I knew that if it wasn't reset by noon, it would hit its memory ceiling, crash, and the automated backup wouldn't trigger correctly because of a glitch in the RAID controller that I'd been meaning to fix informally. A crash would potentially corrupt the active simulations for the Dubai, Munich, and California projects simultaneously. In the old world, I would have remoted in from my laptop while drinking my morning coffee and fixed it in 30 seconds. I would have saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost work. In the new world, server maintenance and hardware stability was the documented responsibility of the IT department. I was a senior structural engineer. For me to touch the server script was a violation of the departmental silo policy Juliana had implemented to prevent unauthorized technical overlap and liability. I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, and watched the clock on my phone. 11 a.m., 11:30 a.m., 12 p.m. I waited for the inevitable. At 12:15 p.m., my phone began to vibrate on the glass table. It was Juliana. I didn't answer. According to my contract, I was not on call during weekends unless a critical emergency protocol had been activated in writing by the CEO. She left a voicemail. Her voice was no longer a scalpel, it was a jagged, panicked mess. Caleb, the analysis server is down. I was trying to pull some data for the board report and the whole system locked up. The Dubai simulation is showing as corrupted. I tried to restart the hardware and I think I deleted the cache. I need you to remote in and fix it now. This is a crisis. I listened to the message while I pruned my roses. I didn't call back. I went into the PMS app on my phone and saw she hadn't filed a ticket. She just called me. A verbal request. Undocumented, unsearchable. Violating the very communication reset she had used to give me a warning. I spent the rest of my Saturday gardening. It was a very peaceful, psychologically safe afternoon. On Monday morning, the glass hive felt like a funeral parlor. Juliana was in her office, and even through the glass walls, I could see her head was in her hands. Arthur was standing over her, looking at a printout, his face pale. The Dubai simulation, 3 weeks of high-intensity computational work, was gone, corrupted beyond repair because a director had tried to manual override a crashed server without knowing the BIOS password or the proper shutdown sequence. I sat down at my desk. I put on my noise-canceling headphones. I opened my email. A notification popped up on my screen. A ticket from Juliana. Subject: urgent, server crash, total data loss. Description: the Kraken server failed on Saturday. I attempted a reboot to save the Dubai project. Data is now missing or unreadable. Please restore from backup and fix the stability issue immediately. This is priority level 1. I clicked accept. I waited exactly 3 hours and 59 minutes. I wanted to ensure I was following the standard response time guidelines for level 1 tickets to the letter. At 11:59 a.m., I sent my documented reply. Response: I have investigated the request. Upon review of the departmental silo policy, document number 992B, structural engineers are strictly prohibited from performing server maintenance, hardware recovery, or OS-level scripting. These tasks are the exclusive domain of the IT department. Furthermore, the data corruption appears to be the result of an unauthorized manual override by non-technical personnel. Refer to Section 8.1 of the Security Protocol. As an engineer, I lack the authorization to intervene. I have forwarded this ticket to the IT department's general queue. Estimated resolution time for hardware forensics is 3 to 5 business days. Ticket closed. 5 minutes later, the glass door of Juliana's office didn't just open, it slammed against the wall. She stormed toward my desk. She wasn't staying 10 feet away. She was right in my face, her hands shaking, her expensive suit wrinkled. Caleb, you knew the server was going to crash. Marcus told me you always reset it on Saturdays. You sat at home and let 3 weeks of work vanish. I slowly, very deliberately, took off my headphones. Marcus, Jax, and the juniors stopped working, but they didn't look up.
They were maintaining focus. "Director," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and terrifyingly calm. "Are you accusing me of having prior knowledge of a hardware failure and failing to act? Because that would be a very serious allegation to make without a documented audit trail or a formal weekend monitoring assignment in my PMS profile." You sabotaged this. You're doing this on purpose," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Sabotage?" I asked, tilting my head. I stood up slowly, making sure to stay exactly 1 inch behind the yellow tape line I'd drawn on the floor to mark my professional workspace zone. "I followed every policy you authored, Director. I stayed in my silo. I communicated through the approved channels. I respected the boundaries you claimed I was violating when I tried to help you with the Winslow mouth. I am being the most professional, most compliant version of Caleb that has ever existed. I am following your rules to the letter." "Arthur," she yelled, turning toward the CEO's office. "Arthur, tell him to fix it. He's the only one who knows the legacy code." Arthur walked out of his office. He looked at the chaos. He looked at the empty white walls where the soul of the company used to live. He looked at his team of world-class engineers who were now acting like mindless, obedient cogs in a broken machine. He looked at me. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer a smile. I just stood there, a perfect, audited asset waiting for a documented command. "Caleb," Arthur said, his voice raspy, "can you fix the server? Can you get the Dubai data back?" "I am an engineer, Arthur," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the Hive. "According to the director's new silo policy, I am not authorized to touch the server hardware. If I do, I would be in violation of my formal warning and could be terminated for unsolicited technical interference. I'm sure you understand. I have a career to protect, and as HR told me, the impact of my actions matters more than my intentions. I cannot risk being unprofessional again." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a bridge. Julianna looked from Arthur to me, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. She was starting to realize that she hadn't built a culture of synergy, she'd built a cage of her own design, and she was the only one on the inside who didn't have the key. The atmosphere in the glass hive didn't just remain cold, it became subterranean. The silence was no longer a lack of noise, it was a physical weight, a pressurized vacuum that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. We weren't just engineers anymore, we were ghosts in the machine, executing tasks with a surgical, terrifying precision that left no room for error, but also no room for success. For the week following the server crash, Julianna retreated into her glass office. She was a silhouette against the fluorescent lights, her fingers flying across her tablet as she likely drafted reports meant to bury me. She didn't look at us. She didn't speak to us. Every communication came through the project management software, also known as the PMS, in the form of sterile, bulleted directives. The Dubai project, the one with the corrupted data, was now officially at risk. The client, a state-owned investment firm that didn't take kindly to delays, had begun sending increasingly curt emails to Arthur. In the old days, I would have stayed until 3 a.m. for 3 nights straight rerunning the simulations from my own local backups, which I wasn't technically supposed to have to bridge the gap. Now, my local backups had been deleted. Security Protocol 12.4, no project data shall exist outside of central encrypted servers. I had followed that rule to the letter on Tuesday morning, right after my formal warning. On Thursday, the perfect storm arrived. It came in the form of a calendar invite for 9 a.m. the following Monday. Subject: Emergency Project Review and Personnel Audit. Attendees: CEO Arthur, Director Julianna, the Board of Directors via video, Caleb, and Brenda, HR. The team knew what it was. It was a gallows. Julianna was going to use the loss of the Dubai data to argue that the glass hive was a den of technical incompetence that required a total restructuring, corporate speak for firing the expensive senior engineers and replacing them with a cheaper, more synergistic workforce. Jax walked by my desk on Friday afternoon. He didn't stop, he didn't whisper, he just dropped a physical sticky note on my keyboard while looking at his watch. It read, "Check the safety and compliance folder in the PMS. She just uploaded the Dubai incident report. It's a work of fiction." I waited until my documented research block at 4 p.m. to open the file. Julianna had outdone herself. She had framed the server crash not as a maintenance issue, but as deliberate technical withholding. She claimed that I had intentionally withheld the knowledge of the reset script to create a crisis. She cited my hostile attitude from the Windload incident as proof of a premeditated pattern of workplace sabotage. She was using the impact over intent rule like a bludgeon. The impact was lost data. Therefore, my intent was irrelevant and my compliance was just a mask for malice. I looked over at Marcus. He caught my eye and gave a near imperceptible nod. The trap was set, but it wasn't the one Julianna thought it was. Monday morning arrived with the gray, oppressive light of a rainy city. The boardroom was on the top floor, a piece of glass and steel that felt like a courtroom. The board of directors appeared on the massive wall-mounted screens, 5 men and 2 women who looked like they were made of granite and hedge fund receipts. Julianna sat at the head of the table, next to Arthur. She looked refreshed, victorious. She had a 50-slide presentation deck ready to go. "Thank you, everyone, for joining," Julianna began, her voice projecting a polished, tragic gravity. "Today is a difficult day for aerodynamics and structural solutions. We are facing a critical failure in our Dubai project, representing a potential loss of $8 million in billable hours and a catastrophic hit to our reputation. This failure is not a result of our new culture, but rather a final desperate act of resistance from a legacy mindset that refuses to evolve." She clicked a button. My face appeared on the screen, next to the word liability.
"Caleb, our project lead, has been an obstacle to synergy since the day I arrived," she continued. "Despite my efforts to implement a psychologically safe and documented environment, he chose to weaponize his technical knowledge. He allowed a server to crash, a server he knew needed a manual reset, simply because he claimed he wasn't authorized to touch it. This is malicious compliance in its most destructive form." One of the board members, a man named Henderson, who was known for being a shark, leaned forward. "Caleb, is this true? You sat by and watched a server fail because of a policy?" I stood up. I didn't bring a laptop. I brought a single thin manila folder. "I would like to address the board's concerns by adhering strictly to the operational transparency framework implemented by Director Julianna," I said. My voice was calm, the deep resonant calm of an engineer who has checked the load-bearing calculations 5 times. "According to the director, intent does not matter. Only impact and adherence to process matter. Is that correct, Director?" Julianna smirked. "That is the core of our modern philosophy, yes." "Excellent," I said. I opened the folder. Let's look at the process. On October 14th, I received a formal verbal warning, which is documented in the PMS, for unsolicited technical interference. The specific incident involved me attempting to correct a wind load calculation that the director had altered for aesthetic symmetry. I slid a paper across the table to Arthur and another to the camera for the board. The director told HR, and I quote from the transcript, "Caleb's unsolicited help is a form of harassment. He must stay in his assigned silo and never intervene in tasks not explicitly assigned to him in the PMS." I looked at Henderson. On Saturday, the 20th, the Kraken server reached its memory ceiling. In the new operational framework authored by Julianna, Section 9.2 states, engineering staff are strictly prohibited from accessing server BIOS or running maintenance scripts.
All hardware issues must be routed through the IT ticket queue to ensure a documented audit trail. I am an engineer. I am not IT. To reset that server would have been a violation of the silo policy and a direct breach of my formal warning. It was an emergency, Julianna interjected. Common sense should have prevailed. Director, I said, turning to her, you told me in our first alignment circle that common sense is often a mask for bypassed protocols. You told the team that if it isn't in the PMS, it doesn't exist. There was no emergency protocol ticket generated until Monday morning. You called me on Saturday. According to the communication reset policy you authored, verbal requests are unstructured noise and are to be ignored to prevent unsearchable directives. The board members were quiet. Henderson was looking at Julianna now, not me. But that's not the most important part, I continued. Let's look at the impact. The director tried to fix the server herself. Section 8.1 of the security protocol, again authored by Julianna, states that unauthorized manual overrides are a fireable offense because they risk data integrity. The director did not have the BIOS password. She attempted to force a reboot 3 times. That is what corrupted the Dubai cache. I have the server logs right here, time-stamped and audited by the IT basement crew. Julianna's face went from blotchy red to a sickly pale white. I was trying to save the project. Intent doesn't matter, Julianna, Arthur said. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice was like grinding gravel. That's what you told me every day for a month. The impact is that you corrupted the data by violating your own security protocols. But wait, I said, holding up a finger, there's more. Let's talk about the aesthetic wind load incident. Julianna tried to stand up. That's irrelevant now. It's entirely relevant to the California Tech Campus project, I said, cutting her off. The director insisted on a conceptual narrative for the gloss atrium. She presented those aesthetic math figures to the client last week. The client signed off on them. However, since the professionalism protocol was in place, my team was forced to execute the project based exactly on the approved deck. We were prohibited from unsolicited interference or correcting the director's vision. I pulled out a second sheet of paper. This is a structural integrity alert. I generated it this morning at 8:01 a.m., the earliest possible moment allowed by my work hour protocol. Because the director rounded the wind load coefficient down from 0.50 to 0.05, the current gloss specifications for the California campus are under-engineered by a factor of 10. If the building is constructed as currently approved in the PMS, the first wind gust over 40 miles per hour will shatter the entire atrium. I looked at the board members on the screen. Following the director's rules to the letter has resulted in a project that is not only a financial liability, but a literal death trap. We did exactly what she asked. We stayed in our silos, we followed the conceptual narrative, and we didn't mansplain the physics to her. We were perfectly professional, and the result is a catastrophe. The boardroom was so silent you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Henderson broke the silence. Julianna, he said, his voice dangerously low, did you alter engineering safety margins for a visual narrative? It was a placeholder, she stammered. Caleb was supposed to fix it in the final execution. I couldn't, I said simply. That would be unsolicited technical interference. You told HR that my attempts to fix your math made you feel unsafe. I had to prioritize your psychological safety over the structural safety of the building. Those were the rules. Arthur stood up. He looked at Julianna. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked like the man who used to weld I-beams 400 feet in the air. Arthur, Julianna said, you're done. Your operational synergy has nearly killed 2 projects and potentially 100 people. Get out of my boardroom. You can't fire me, she screamed. I followed the board's mandate. I implemented the structure you asked for. You implemented a cage, Henderson said from the screen, and you're the only one who fell into the pit. Arthur, handle the termination. Caleb, can you fix the California math? I've already drafted the correction, but per the PMS, I'll need a formal request for revision ticket from the CEO's office, just to keep the audit trail clean. Arthur actually chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. You'll have it in 30 seconds, Caleb. Julianna left the building 20 minutes later. She didn't get a goodbye. She didn't get a farewell synergy circle. She was escorted out by a security guard who made sure she stayed exactly 10 feet away from everyone's desk. The glass hive didn't immediately return to normal. The professionalism protocol had left scars. We were a little more cautious, a little more aware of how easily a toxic personality could weaponize the system. But about an hour after Juliana's office was cleared out, Marcus stood up on his chair. He took a laser pointer and aimed it at a smudge on the white wall. "Hey, Jax," he yelled across the room, "the rendering on the Munich spire looks like a baboon drew it with a crayon. Get over here and fix your syntax score." Jax let out a bark of laughter, grabbed a donut from a box that had mysteriously appeared on his desk, and ran over to Marcus. Sarah, the junior engineer, looked at me. "Are we going to get in trouble for the noise, Caleb?" I took off my noise-canceling headphones and tossed them into the trash can. "No," I said, leaning back and taking a long sip of lukewarm coffee. "The Midnight Protocol is back in effect, and if anyone asks, tell them we're just optimizing our headspace." Sarah smiled and went back to work. Juliana became a ghost. For a few months, we heard she was trying to sue for wrongful termination and workplace bullying, but the company's legal team simply pointed to her own PMS logs. They showed a director who had authored every policy that led to her own downfall. She had built her own prison, and every piece of evidence against her was documented, time-stamped, and filed in her own searchable audit trail.
He eventually left the industry entirely. I heard she's a life coach now, specializing in boundary setting. Sometimes when the Kraken server acts up on a Saturday, I still remote in from my porch. I hit the reset script, I watch the Dubai data flow smoothly into the backup, and I think about the decimal point on slide 42. The wind still blows at 100 miles per hour in California. The bridges in Norway still hum with the wind. The world is a dangerous, heavy, complex place. It's no place for a narrative. It's a place for the math. And as long as the math is right, the glass hive stays quiet. Not the silence of a cage, but the quiet, humming flow of a team that knows exactly what it takes to keep the sky from falling. She eventually left the industry entirely. I heard she's a life coach now, specializing in boundary setting. Sometimes when the Kraken server acts up on a Saturday, I still remote in from my porch. I hit the reset script, I watch the Dubai data flow smoothly into the backup, and I think about the decimal point on slide 42. The wind still blows at 100 miles per hour in California. The bridges in Norway still hum with the wind. The world is a dangerous, heavy, complex place. It's no place for a narrative. It's a place for the math. And as long as the math is right, the glass hive stays quiet. Not the silence of a cage, but the quiet, humming flow of a team that knows exactly what it takes to keep the sky from falling.